and thank you for joining us. I'm ABC 10 meteorologist Brendan Minchef. Today, we are talking about the Delta. It's a very, very important part of the state of California, from the fish that live there, the native wildlife, also for agricultural purposes, recreational purposes, and of course, water transport purposes. We move a lot of water from Northern California to Southern California through the Delta, and for that reason, it's also a highly controversial place. Today, we sit down with Restore the Delta to talk about how they work with and against the state in the Delta and how they're also fighting against the Delta Tunnel Project. Take a look. I am joined today by Barbara Barrigan-Parrilla. She is the Executive Director with Restore the Delta, based out of Stockton. Barbara, thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So with the first question, what is Restore the Delta?
Restore the Delta is a 501c3 organization whose mission is to work and advocate for a healthy Delta estuary and healthy communities situated within that estuary.
And you guys do a lot of work in the Delta. You obviously live there. I'm sure a lot of the folks that work at Restore the Delta live there. Why is this so important?
It's the largest estuary on the west coast of the Americas. It is home to 750 native species. It's the largest strip of prime farmland in California. It's 1,100 miles of waterways, and it has one of the most wonderful, diverse communities in the world, and definitely within the state. It is becoming a hub of technology, industry, and agriculture. There are wonderful urban-rural connections, and it's a very young region also.
And with all of that comes importance, and also, I would say, a lot of controversy. Do you agree with that?
For years.
All right. Well, I want to ask you about two things specifically today. The first is the Elevate 28, the new state water project strategic plan, risk-informed strategic plan. We talked to the Department of Water Resources very recently about the plan, and essentially the Elevate 28 plan is sustainably manage, benefit people, protect, restore, enhance the environment, and they want the state water project to be the most reliable, sustainable, and resilient provider. What are your takeaways from the Elevate 28 plan?
Sadly, it's woefully incomplete in some ways, has some good pieces, but is really misguided because it is still tied to a water management system that withdraws and takes too much water from the Delta. That's even before the Delta Tunnel, and the Delta Tunnel will exacerbate it all. The way forward in California to manage water is for broad-scale floodplain restoration along our major rivers, and really great local solutions, local projects for managing water in urban areas in Southern California and the Bay Area, and then coupled with getting smart about agriculture. Are we going to be able to maintain agriculture in the state at the same level with climate change? We don't think so. We think there are a lot of good, solid solutions to keep a good chunk of agriculture productive. But we have to get smarter, wiser about how we're doing it, and some of it may not be sustainable in the future.
So there may be some hard choices to make going forward.
Yes.
The State Water Project, though, delivers water to millions of people, even down in Southern California. So, I mean, if this plan isn't the solution, like how do we move forward?
We actually work very closely with a coalition out of Los Angeles, and we have colleagues we've worked with for years in Southern California, because this plan is too expensive for their ratepayers, and it doesn't get new or better water to really their environmental justice communities. Right now, there's a major effort by DWR and the state to push the Delta Tunnel and some agreements around water that are not part of the normal regulatory process as protective of environmental justice communities. But in truth, it doesn't solve the problems for communities that need protection in Northern California or in the Delta, for tribes, which have been left out of a number of these processes, or when they've given input, that input has been disregarded. But it also doesn't solve the problem for ratepayers who are tied to environmental justice communities in Southern California. And it really won't go to benefit the water users, those small drinking water communities in the San Joaquin Valley that also get left out. There's a message of we're all going to get better together, but that's really not true. It's very much a move to solidify a lot of, and kind of institutionalize through infrastructure a series of laws and processes for decades that have left all of these important communities out of the water planning picture. Water is a public trust resource.
And I want to touch on one of the things you said is the Delta Tunnel.
Yes.
Restore the Delta has been very vocally against the Delta Tunnel, as have a lot of other advocacy and environmental organizations, but the state has also been very vocal for the tunnel,
Right.
saying it's necessary. I want to read part of your response to the state water project and the claim that the tunnel was necessary. You said, Governor Newsom cannot claim to put water equity in frontline communities at the forefront while ignoring the catastrophic impact that the tunnel would have on the Delta. When I had Tony Myers, the principal operating officer of the state water project, here with us, he called that viewpoint a little short-sighted. It would only be taking water when available, not from low flow. It would capture and move water through the tunnel and not the Delta, which he said would have minimal impact. I see you kind of squinting.
It's such a twisting effect. And this is the part that continues to break at our heart, because we sat with the design construction group for 2 years and tried to figure out if we could get real answers to make the project work. When you dig into the details of the environmental impact report, it simply allows for greater exported water during dry periods. And that's what we can't sustain. The Delta is already clogging up with harmful algal blooms. It's this green toxic algae that creates dangerous pollution for people and for wildlife. It also becomes airborne. We can't take more water out of the system in the dry periods. And I would add, as a climate project, we think it's going to fail as well during flood when they claim that they're going to take the big gulp. The sediment that comes downstream on the Sacramento River, the leaves, the debris. Our storms are increasing with climate change in magnitude. And when we have a major arc storm, it's going to render those intakes with one tunnel inoperable much faster than they have modeled or planned for. At the same time, during these major storms, we have storm surge coming in from the coast through the Delta. We're going to put so much money in building it, but yet we're not building up the infrastructure to actually protect all the people and communities that live behind the levees throughout the Delta.
Well, and that was something else that they had touched on, is about the levees, but more with regards to earthquakes and rising sea levels.
Right.
Tony Myers last week told us that a 6.3 magnitude earthquake or greater would essentially cripple a lot of the levees, make them fail. And so the tunnel would be a way of...
It's fascinating. We had a 5.5 earthquake in the Delta about 6 months ago. And I think the only levee slump that was identified was a DWR levee on Sherman Island. We have really good engineering integrity. Is that the end of the story? No, it is not perfect. The tunnel is going to take, between permitting and construction, 20 years to bring online. There is a lot that's going to happen with climate change in those 20 years. They have to shore up the levees. They have to make the Delta really climate resistant now so that water can continue to be exported to Southern California. And actually, we favor that. We know we're always going to have to share water, but there are ways to do it much more cost effectively, share that water, and protect the estuary. There's another important part of this, too, that, because of the work that we've done more recently with tribes, and I do not speak for tribes, but the Delta is a cultural resource for them. And a number of the groups that we partner with, in their words, are not satisfied with the Department of Water Resources addressing their uses and their cultural, historical, and environmental claims to the Delta.
So is there some sort of middle ground then between where there's maybe no tunnel or a smaller tunnel, or the state's really adamant that this is the way forward with climate change?
to ever have a discussion about how to change infrastructure in the Delta first, the regulatory process at the Water Board called the Bay Delta Plan has to be finished first. They're 30 years behind. We've now gone through another workshop on this at the Water Board, and we're going to have to go back in now to readdress the plan, I think maybe for the 8th or 9th time in my career, because they're going to bring in voluntary agreements where water sellers from the north and water exporters from the south are carving up the system. But they've done that all behind closed doors, and they have left tribal environmental justice communities, Delta government, Delta water districts out of the planning process, the commercial fishing community, and larger environmental organizations. First off, that process is completely broken. It's deal making of the worst kind. But second, there is no proper accounting for using science-based standards on how to manage water flow. The problem with the state of California is it refuses to do that work. And we keep saying you have to get the order of operations right. That planning has to be completed. It has to be science-based. It has to be inclusive. Then you can make other decisions in the future.
And you brought up the Bay Delta Plan. So
Yes.
let's talk a little bit about the Bay Delta Plan. Recently was upheld in court. There were 116 claims, 700,000 something pages. They were all denied. The Bay Delta Plan, though, provides increased flows on the San Joaquin, Stanislaus, Tuolumne, and Merced rivers and their tributaries, which would benefit salmon, native fish populations, and then it will also increase salinity in the South Delta. All positives?
No. And that's only phase one. So when I'm talking about the Bay Delta Plan, that was the San Joaquin River side. It's been carved up. We are still way far out on finishing on the Sacramento River side, and then the two plans have to be merged up. So the problem with what happened on the San Joaquin River side, and we were not a party to the litigation, partners we work with were, is that one, that salinity standard has been altered, which is really problematic for landowners and farmers in the South Delta. And their set of concerns really need to be taken seriously. They do have riparian water rights in the Delta, and they have to be honored under the way the system works legally right now. Second, 40% flows are an improvement of unimpaired flow down the San Joaquin River system. They are not the solution because science shows it has to be 60%. Think about this. Think about just if you picture in your mind what a river is, and you're taking water of a river, do you think a river can really survive and be healthy if half of its content is taken away? So we were not a party to the litigation because at the time, we thought, let's work on the Sacramento River side. Let's work on the merging of the plans. And let's see if we can make things better together. We knew that even getting to 40% because of the political hamstringing by water exporters in California, that was a hard place for the board to get to, and it did impact careers for even making that decision. But now, we're really resistant to anything that is below the 60% level science-based standards on either river. And the reason for that is because we feel like if you give an inch, a mile gets taken. And so we have to really follow the line on what the best available peer-reviewed science says and take it from there.
So where do we go from here? What is the path forward? Is it increased communication between state and local advocacy organizations and environmental organizations like yours? Is it a complete rethinking of what happens right now in the Delta? I mean, where do we go from here?
Well, for us, there's a couple paths forward. There's a couple paths forward there. Sadly, we had to file litigation against the Delta Tunnel project. There are a number of lawsuits. We are a party in one group of tribes, fishing, and environmental justice organizations. That's the route we had to take because our concerns were not addressed. Second, we have a Title VI complaint right now that is under investigation by US EPA against the State Water Resources Control Board for failure to update the Bay Delta Plan in a timely manner. The reason why the question of timeliness is key is because when you have pollution impacts, you have cultural resources disappearing for tribes, you have the second year of a salmon closure, the state, by not acting in a timely manner to use the best available science, is creating great harm on millions of people. And so we've had to go this route to try to force change. Third is always for us public awareness and education and advocacy. The Delta is a young region. Our entire staff, with the exception of me, is like age 31 and under. We are building the fourth and fifth generation to move forward in this work, and we're partnering with other organizations to do the same thing, because what's going to happen with the estuary is going to be harder to manage with climate change going in the future if we don't get it right now. So it's, you know, in terms of talking with the state, at this point, we have to say it's up to them. What happens in these processes is we get brought in sometimes, and they say, oh, yeah, they check off a box, and nothing that we advocate for has changed. So what does that leave us? That leaves us administrative and legal routes to take back power. But it's also about changing the mindset in California. And this is where I'm really confident, because on water, most Californians are with us. So that's what we do.
And trying to maybe end on a more positive note,
Yeah.
Are there some positives happening in the Delta right now, maybe at the state level, at the local level?
Sure.
Anything we can kind of walk away and feel good about?
We have really great relationships with the Delta Stewardship Council, which is, of course, responsible for the Delta Reform Act. They've been doing a lot of work on identifying environmental justice and tribal community needs. We have a good burgeoning relationship with the Delta Conservancy on how to manage land. We are partnering with them, and we are working on building out rice farming as a way to reverse subsidence and improve land management in the Delta. And then I would also say, good relationship with the Delta Protection Commission. We're working on water planning into the future with climate change with academics and representatives from the state agency. There's a lot of good work, and there's a lot of goodwill, and there are a lot of people who want to work together if we could just get the Bay Delta Plan finished and the tunnel out of the way. I think it would move forward rapidly.
Barbara, always good to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much.